your daughter-in-law said that there should be transparency in the Epstein case. Do you agree with her, sir?
The Attorney General's handled that very well. Whatever she thinks is credible, she should release, yeah.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Behavioral Arts. My name is Spidey, and I use my degree in sociology and psychology, my certifications in criminal interrogation and body language analysis, and over 10 years' experience as an award-winning mentalist to teach people behavioral analysis and practical psychology on stages and television shows all over the world. As the controversy around the Epstein files continue to escalate, President Donald Trump and Attorney General Pam Bondi faced some follow-up questions this week, and their answers left a lot to be desired. But what do their body language, facial expressions, and word choice reveal? And what is the huge, scientifically proven psychological mistake that Donald Trump made on social media? Let's dive right in. Okay, for those of you who aren't caught up with the story and what's going on with the Epstein files, I'll give a very quick summary. So, for a very long time now, the administration has been promising that they're going to release the Epstein files, and there was talk of a client list. However, 2 weeks ago, the FBI and the DOJ released a report saying that there's nothing to see, they didn't find anything, there's no client list, and that the whole investigation basically led to a whole lot of nothing. In response to this, last week on the channel, we looked at President Donald Trump and Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt and what they had to say about this report, and we looked at their verbal and nonverbal communication and some things that stood out as rather odd. However, since then, things have continued to escalate, and it seems like the story's changing a little bit, or is it? This week on the lawn of the White House, President Donald Trump was asked follow-up questions, and then Attorney General Pam Bondi was also asked some questions about what Donald Trump said. And it seems like their answers don't quite match up. In addition to this, Donald Trump published a couple of social media posts that seemed really emotionally charged and got a lot of people and media sources talking. And in this video, my guest and I are going to look at all of that. We're going to look at his statements, Pam Bondi's statements, as well as these social media posts, and a huge psychological oversight that we can all learn from and apply to our day-to-day lives. I am really excited to introduce this week's guest. He is a clinical and forensic psychologist and body language expert who has been making some huge waves with this whole Epstein topic right here on YouTube. Everybody welcome, for the first time on the channel, Dr. G.
I'm thrilled to be here. I'm a huge fan. This is going to be awesome.
It's going to be so exciting. And before we jump into this analysis, I want to talk about one of the reasons that I'm really excited to collab with you. It's because of all the body language guys out there and all the different channels, there's a lot that I really, really appreciate. But one of the reasons I love your stuff, and I've been loving your Epstein coverage, is that you're extremely unbiased. I can't sense any bias watching your stuff. And you don't sensationalize body language, which I love. You know, a lot of people out there will draw big conclusions on body language, but I think you and I have a mutual understanding that body language doesn't give us all the answers.
That's right. You know, it's absolutely my goal to stay as neutral as possible. That's part of being a psychologist. You have to be able to do that. So I do that when I do my videos as well, as much as I can. And it is extremely important to me that people don't overinterpret what we're seeing when it comes to body language, because I think there's so much fascinating, real information we can get from it. I try to limit it just to that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we could get some great clues, but it's rarely like the whole answer just based on one movement. And I love that you keep it realistic. So I'm really excited. Let's start by jumping right into this clip where Donald Trump was asked some questions while he was on the White House lawn. He was being interviewed by some reporters, and they brought up this Epstein topic. So let's start with that.
Mr. President, your daughter-in-law said that there should be transparency in the Epstein case. Do you agree with her, sir?
The Attorney General's handled that very well. She's really done a very good job. And I think that when you look at it, you'll understand that. I would like to see that also. But I think the Attorney General, the credibility is very important. And you want credible evidence for something like that. And I think the Attorney General's handled it very well.
Okay, a lot of interesting stuff here, both verbally and non-verbally. So Dr. G, why don't you start by walking us through behaviorally what we're seeing? Go ahead.
So I'm someone who has analyzed President Trump quite a lot. I've watched his speeches. I've watched him talk about just about everything. So I'm very used to seeing his body language. And what stood out here was how little body language we're seeing as far as using his hands. For anybody that's watched him speak, he does tend to do this a lot with his hands. He is very emphatic. He really wants you to listen to every word he's saying. That it tends to be very important to him. But this time, his hand stayed by his side. He moved around a little bit, but you really saw very little in that regard. And why that's important is that typically, at least in my experience, because I do a lot of forensic work, when people sit still, that means they don't want to be seen. If you think about if you're out in the wild and there's a wild animal and you spot it, the first thing you do is you freeze. And so typically, when people don't move much, they typically do, or if they stop moving when they're talking about something, that's something you pay attention to. So as I saw him not moving and emphasizing as he normally does, I started to think he's really talking about something he does not want to be talking about right now.
Yeah, amazing. And we also see some of the same thing in his face as well, don't we?
Absolutely. Research shows that all over the world, we all use eyebrows to make people pay attention to our face. When we want to be heard, when we want people to listen to what we're saying, we raise our eyebrows up, especially at the end of a sentence or in the midst of saying something that's really important. That really works well to emphasize. And something we saw none of during this clip was President Trump raising his eyebrows. It's something that he typically does pretty much all the time. Almost all the clips that you're going to watch of him, when he really has a point to make, you're going to see those eyebrows go up. And since they didn't at all, that likely means he really does not want you to pay that much attention to what he's saying right now. Once again, he's really just trying to pass on through. Nothing about what he did makes it seem like he wants to emphasize or for you to pay attention to anything specific that he said at all. So hopefully that's helping you understand some of what we're seeing behaviorally. But I know, Spidey, you took some amazing notes on what he said verbally, and I really want to hear more about that.
Yeah, let's go into that. Let's go into the verbal stuff. So the first thing you'll notice is that the answer that he provides doesn't really address the question. The question was about transparency. So it was like, your daughter-in-law said there should be transparency, or do you agree with that? And he immediately shifts the topic to how great of a job the Attorney General is doing, Pam Bondi. And this is something we're going to go into a little bit later as well. He's really been very keen on talking her up, even on social media. But here he just jumps immediately on this. She's doing a really great job. He doesn't go into details as to why she's doing a great job, what that great job entails, just that she's doing a great job. So in behavior, we call this resume statements or convincing statements. When we build ourselves up, in this case, it's on him, but the administration, we build it up in order to compensate for another shortcoming elsewhere. So I'm not going to really tell you this, but look how great we're doing at this other thing. And there's been a lot of that throughout this entire Epstein story recently. Another thing that really caught my attention is two sentences that he said in a row. He said, when you look at it, you'll understand that. I would like to see that also.
I think that when you look at it, you'll understand that. I would like to see that also.
So there's a lot going on here that confused me. First of all, when you look at it, when you look at what? Because she said that there's really nothing to release. There's no list to show. So he says, when you look at it, look at what? What is it that we're going to look at that we're going to understand? And these are very vague terms. When you look at it, you'll understand that. What it? What that? Then he follows with, I would like to see that also. So first he's saying that if we see it, we'll understand, suggesting that whatever this thing is, he's seen it. Then he follows with, I'd like to see it also. So he hasn't seen this ambiguous thing that we will understand when we see it. And that's my last point about this. He says, I would like to see that also. Whatever this is, whatever she's working on, that she's doing a great job with, he wants to see it also. However, just last week at a cabinet meeting, when he was asked about Epstein, he immediately shut down the topic, saying, are we still talking about Epstein? Like suggesting that it's extremely unimportant.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy's been talked about for years. You're asking, we have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable.
So now, why are you saying that you would like to see it also? Where is that, are we still talking about Epstein attitude? He didn't shut this one down, whereas a week ago he did. And he was very adamant about the fact that it's talked about way too much. Here he's going, no, I'd like to see it as well. And she's doing a great job. So we're getting a lot of inconsistencies. And that's the theme of my analysis today. I want you all to focus on inconsistencies, whether it's between what President Trump is saying and Pam Bondi is saying, whether it's between different statements that he said. There seems to be a lot of inconsistency on how important everyone believes these files are. So let's keep looking out for those. Back to some behaviors here, but not with Donald Trump, but more specifically with Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary who's standing right next to him. And we both noticed something, Dr. G, in her body language here that doesn't quite mean anything now, but we're going to keep in mind for later. So can you walk us through what we saw with her?
Absolutely. So something that you notice when two people get along is that they mimic each other's behavior. And they also not in agreement if they agree with something someone else is saying. So, as you can see, when President Trump is speaking, Caroline Leavitt is sitting there nodding her head. And this is something that it's subtle, but if you're paying attention to her, you'll definitely notice.
Yes, and more specifically, she's nodding her head when he's complimenting the Attorney General.
Attorney General's handled that very well. She is.
So just put a pin in that when she agrees with the point that's being made, we are seeing signs of that agreement. All right, now we're going to look at the second part of that same interview to look at what changes and what's the same, and most importantly, what's important to him. But before we do me a huge favor, hit that subscribe button, turn those notifications on for more behavioral analysis and practical psychology content.
How many more states? The Attorney General briefed you on the DOJ and FBI review, the findings of that review. The Attorney General briefed you on
On
that.
what? On the
DOJ and FBI
on what?
review.
On what subject?
Epstein.
Okay.
On Epstein, of the review of the files. Attorney General Pam Bondi.
A very quick briefing.
Did she tell you, what did she tell you about the review? And specifically, did she tell you at all that your name appeared in the file?
No. She's given us just a very quick briefing, and in terms of the credibility of the different things that they've seen. And I would say that, these files were made up by Comey, they were made up by Obama, they were made up by the Biden, we went through years of that with the Russia hoax, with all of the different things that we had to go through. We've gone through years of it, but she's handled it very well, and it's going to be up to her. Whatever she thinks is credible, she should release. Yeah.
Okay, a lot of fascinating stuff on this one. Can't wait to hear your analysis. Dr. G, take it away.
So now we got to see some real body language. There were actually things that we could watch, and I'm going to talk you through what we saw, sort of in order of how I saw it. So the first thing you saw was that he licked his lips. I think that the emotions are building up a little bit in him. So he's licking his lips. That soothes us a little bit. Shortly after that, when the journalist starts asking a question, you see him raise his head up. It's very brief, very, very brief, but that's a universal indicator of pride. So it also exposes the neck. The neck's very vulnerable. Any times that we're being vulnerable, that's another way that we can sort of show that we're above all of this. So I do think that as he's being asked these questions, it probably feels a little bit frivolous to him. He doesn't want to take it too seriously, doesn't particularly like the fact that a journalist is continuing to persist on this topic. In terms of his tone, the way he was speaking, that also changed. You may have noticed there was a little bit more of an edge to his voice. He was speaking a little bit more loudly. He was leaning in as the journalist was speaking to him. He sounded curt. He sounded irritated. And he also made the journalist repeat what she was asking about. In other words, what was the topic? And she had to say Epstein. And what that does is it can make you feel intimidated if you're having to say something like that, because clearly he's feeling annoyed, making you say it out loud, which I assume he still knew they were talking about Epstein. So it didn't seem like something he really needed clarification on. But making somebody say that makes him uncomfortable, and hopefully it'll have a chilling effect. At least I'm talking from President Trump's perspective. Hopefully it'll have a chilling effect, and other people that want to be liked by you or that get along with you won't ask questions like that. So the idea is, if people see how I react to this, they're going to be less likely to ask me questions like this. And then towards the end, there's a couple of other major things that I noticed. One is that he really was using the emphasis again. You want to see his body language come alive, act like he normally does. As soon as he starts talking about Comey, Obama, you see his head moving forward. You see his hands come out as soon as he starts talking about Russia, hands spreading apart again. That's what he emphasizes. Now he wants you to listen again. He has an audience. He wants you to pay attention. So he's doing all of these indicators. He's got his hands back out. That's really when he shines. And so you know that he feels like he's in his element when he's talking about these things. And after the journalist asks him about Epstein, you're going to see President Trump do a slow blink. And typically that means that we're feeling annoyed. He's not doing what we call eye blocking or eye shielding, where he closes his eyes, but it's a slow blink. He's not liking what he's hearing. Something else you may have noticed is that when the journalist asked about whether or not Pam Bondi indicated if he is in the Epstein files or if his name is in there, he didn't really have much of a reaction. You didn't see any anger. You didn't see any fear. There was nothing that really stood out there. He scooted back a little bit. He paused for a brief moment to think about what he was going to say, but you didn't see any sort of emotional reaction, no strong emotional reaction. And that's actually fairly consistent with other interviews that we've seen where people have brought up whether or not he's in the files. He doesn't really seem to have any or much of an emotional reaction to that at all.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you're saying that it is something that we often see with him. In fact, there's other topics too where he's been accused of things and he kind of brushes it off and moves along. So we can't look at that and go, oh my God, he's for sure on the list. He didn't react. You know, that goes back to what we were saying earlier. Body language isn't that conclusive. It's just interesting to note that last week when the topic of Epstein alone came up, he was all angered by it. We're not talking about Epstein anymore. Why are you guys still talking about Epstein? But at the idea of him being on the list, we're not seeing any reaction. In fact, he's getting off the topic as soon as he possibly can. He doesn't address it at all. He doesn't even answer a question. Instead, he goes towards this very ambiguous, very vague, you know, we talked about it really quickly. She briefed me really quickly, and we really don't get any answers at all. Earlier, I was talking about the importance of incongruity or inconsistencies. And in this statement alone, there's a very big inconsistency. So he starts off by saying that she gave me a very quick briefing, and this is a way for him to say, I really don't have too much information on this, kind of as a scapegoat, you know, if he doesn't really want to answer anything. But he says, in terms of the credibility of the different things that they've seen. So that suggests that there's some credibility. It's not 0%, it's not 100%, it's somewhere between those two, because he's not saying she briefed me and there's nothing credible there. Then he goes into saying that the files were made up by Comey, by Obama. These are made up. They have no credibility whatsoever. So we go from some credibility to no credibility. They're completely made up. And then he ends with a very important statement right at the end. He says, whatever she thinks is credible, she should release. But a second ago, he said that it's all made up by Comey and Obama. So what do you mean she should release what's credible? What's credible? A moment ago, the whole thing is made up. Before that, some of it's credible. Now we're going back to there's some credible stuff that she should release if she deems it to be credible.
And in terms of the credibility of the different things that they've seen, these files were made up by Comey. They were made up by Obama. Whatever she thinks is credible, she should release. Yeah.
So that statement creates an inconsistency with what he just said, but it also creates a massive inconsistency with what he said at the cabinet meeting. When he said, we've all been talking about Epstein for so long, are you guys really still talking about this when there's so many other things? And he dismissed it as unimportant, but now he's saying in this answer that there are things that he himself would like to see and that whatever is credible, she should release. So we're getting these big fluctuations in the credibility, the importance, and the legitimacy of this entire thing. Okay, I want to talk about Caroline Leavitt as well, Dr. G. So we see something different here. And the first thing I want to point out is how she turns to him before he starts answering. So if we look at this entire sequence with the reporters, and I watched the whole thing, in most cases, she turns to him when he starts speaking, and sometimes even after. She stays with the reporter a little and then eventually turns to him. This is one of the rare times. It happened with a Putin question as well, where it was much faster. It was like a millisecond before he started answering.
Well, we're going to see what happens with President Putin.
But on this one, she turns to him well before he starts answering.
No, she's
I think she's curious about this answer herself. She hears the question. She wants to know what he has to say. But that's not the only indication of that. There are more. Dr. G, what's another one?
Well, I think we're all captivated by this, and we want to know what's going to happen next. So I think we're all actually quite curious what President Trump's going to say. And clearly so was she. She was looking right at him. She would look away a little bit, but for the most part, she was really dialed in. She wanted to know exactly what he was going to say, just like the rest of us. We're all very curious.
Finally, the last thing I want to say is, and we have to be careful. We can't read too much into things that are missing. These are just notes. But when he was talking about how it's a hoax, like these other hoaxes and all this stuff, we didn't see anything on her face that suggests in any way agreement, which is something we have seen with her before. So Dr. G, maybe you could talk about a few things that would, to you, indicate, okay, there's some kind of agreement here. She's on the same page. Like, what are some things you would expect?
Well, the most obvious would be that I would expect her to be nodding her head, even gently nodding it a little bit, because it's hard for us to not do that when we strongly agree with somebody. We just tend to, when we feel something, we tend to show it in our body somewhere. So I would expect her to be nodding in agreement more. I would expect her maybe to be smile, like there were some brief smiles, but I might expect her to have a smile that suggests that she's approving of what's being said. And to me, it looked more like curiosity than anything. She was just paying attention to what he was saying, and she was listening rather than being a participant in it. She was more inactive in that way. She was just listening.
Yep, she was in learning mode.
Right.
All right, now we're going to look at a clip from later that same day, but this time with Attorney General Pam Bondi. And she was asked some questions about Epstein, more specifically about what Donald Trump had said in the clips we just saw. Because what he said was that whatever she has that's credible, she should release. So some reporters were like, okay, well, is she going to do that? So let's look at how she handled those questions.
He said that he would support you releasing additional credible evidence from the Epstein investigation, Is that something that you are open to doing?
Let me
You said
take
this
that.
just a few moments
Yeah.
ago.
Let me take that first. This today is about fentanyl. This is about a wall of people right outside this room who have died from, I appreciate your question, but this today is about fentanyl overdoses throughout our country and people who have lost loved ones to fentanyl. That's the message that we're here to send today. Nothing about Epstein. I'm not going to talk about Epstein, but thank you. Anything else on topic today? Only on topic, guys. Go ahead.
The president said today you would release credible files related to Mr. Epstein. Are you prepared to do that, and when would you?
Our memo today, our memo speaks for itself, and we'll get back to you on anything else. I haven't seen all of his statements today. Thank you.
How would you respond to the MAGA base that has expressed a lot of frustration about it?
We're going to fight to keep America safe again, and we're fighting together as a team. That's what's so important.
So for anybody that's been following this story and had watched Pam Bondi when she was in her cabinet meeting, this is a different Pam Bondi. In that meeting, she was very accommodating. She was smiling. She was nodding. She wanted to try to get along with the people asking questions and to be informative. This time, the gloves came off. She was trying to be dominant. You could see immediately she walked over to that podium. Her arms go out. It's kind of like if you think about a CEO who's talking to all the employees that they have that are failing and is angry. That's what it came across like, taking up as much space as possible. And when we want to be dominant, we take up more space. Kind of like if you think if a police officer stands with their hands on their hips or somebody does something like that, it's take up as much space as I can because I am in control here. You're going to do what I say. You're going to listen to me. So that's what she was trying to do. And as you could hear in the tone of her voice, it was also very commanding. So she tried to set this boundary, but the journalists weren't having any of it. This topic is just too hot. So they kept asking questions. But you'll see when she mentioned the name Epstein after she had tried to shut it down, you see eye blocking there. Her eyes close. And the reason that people do that is that they don't really want to see the reaction of the person that they're talking to. They don't want to see what happens when they say an answer or where they're talking about something they don't like. It also sometimes blocks what they're trying to think about. It can be both, really. Do you have any thoughts about this, Spidey?
Oh yeah, lots of thoughts. So yeah, the research shows that typically like we close our eyes when we're trying to focus on something. So the way I like to put it is the eyes are the garage doors to the thoughts. So whether we're trying to keep something in, like trying to remember something, or keep something out, something negative happens and you close your eyes because you don't want to face it, we do this. But you're absolutely right. Sometimes we do it because it's not a thought we don't want to let in, but we don't want to see that reaction of the person. We don't want to deal with that. And something that's really interesting about this is that when we watch magicians, and myself included, I noticed this a while ago, the moment that I would do the sneaky thing, the secret thing in my magic trick, I would close my eyes because I didn't want to see the spectator seeing what I did. I didn't want to be disappointed by the disappointment or catching me. I don't want to face it. So especially if it was like a new trick I'm working on, at that moment where I did the secret move, I noticed in footage watching myself that I would eye block because I just didn't want to deal with it. And we see this a lot with magicians. And I often say, if you want to know how I do my card tricks, don't look at my hands, look at my eyes. Because when the sneaky stuff happens, I tend to look away myself. So I agree completely with what you're saying. We see those eye blocks the moment she mentions Epstein. And it could be the irritation with the topic. I don't want to deal with this. But it could also very well be, I don't want to see the disappointment of these reporters because I don't have answers for them and we're not talking about this. It's hard for us to know, but there's some kind of conflict there for sure.
You've got to have a pretty tough personality to have a job like that, but that doesn't change the fact that anybody under this amount of pressure would feel incredibly stressed. So I can imagine that doing these press conferences or talking about subjects that are unrelated to Epstein and having people ask questions about it, I'm sure is probably very irritating and very frustrating for her. So as we see this body language sort of changing and coming out of her in this way, I think it's pretty understandable because there's everybody in the news is talking about her right now. So I can only imagine what she's going through dealing with all of this. But what else? The other part that we're seeing is towards the end, after she's continually asked questions about this, you see her back up from the podium. She's disengaging. Something that I often talk about is that when we're trying to communicate with people and we're trying to connect, we tend to lean forward. When we're trying to disengage, we tend to lean back. So as you can see, she just full on steps back there. She is fully trying to set a boundary and say, like, I'm out, I'm done. Like, stop asking me about this.
Beautifully said, completely agreed. And the verbal stuff supports the nonverbal really well because again, right in the beginning, we have a non-answer and a refusal to deny. So she's being asked a question. The president said this. Are you going to release these things? She doesn't deny it. She doesn't confirm it. She doesn't answer the question. She immediately shifts towards, we're not here to talk about that. We're going to talk about this way more important thing. And there are people suffering from this, almost insinuating like, how dare you talk about that thing when we're here to talk about this much more important thing. And what I find interesting is that she could have just as easily said, no, there's nothing else to release. Now, can we stick to the topic, please? Like, it would have been as easy. Why don't we have that answer? I think it's because we're seeing, again, a lot of inconsistency between what he's saying and what she's saying, between all the promises that she made. We all saw the Fox News interview where she said that that list is sitting on her desk.
The DOJ may be releasing the list of Jeffrey Epstein's clients. Will that really happen?
It's sitting on my desk right now to review.
Now, they've tried to say that what she meant was the file was sitting on her desk, but for them to come out and say there's nothing, and that, she's got nothing to talk about, and here she's talking about, our memo was very clear, but I don't really know what the president said, so there seems to be a lack of synchronicity there. So it's weird. These incongruencies are just too weird for me.
So one of my observations throughout watching this, and having watched a lot of footage of both Pam Bondi and President Trump, is that the body language is different here, and I think that has to do with the fact that the circumstances are so different than anything that President Trump has dealt with before. He's dealt with lots of adversity, people accusing him of things, as he talked about before, the Russiagate situation, all of that. But this is a situation that he created. And so it's very different. And so as he talks about this, it comes across very differently because he's never been faced with anything like this before. Sure, he's done things that people have created certain situations, but this is very unique in this sense. He's never had backlash in this way from a lot of his base supporters and so on and so forth. So, but as we're seeing this progress, he's getting more frustrated. He's using shame as a tool to get people to stop talking about things. These are different tactics than he oftentimes uses. We just don't see that much from him. And I think that largely does have to do with the fact that he's the one that created this situation, that this is his administration, his attorney general. Obviously, he didn't create the Epstein situation, but in terms of the way they presented the information, that is his administration. And I think that he's flummoxed as to how to feel about that at this point.
I completely agree, because usually he's countering something that's coming from a different source. This time he has to tread softly because the thing he's countering may have come from his own side. So they're out of sync, and that's a dangerous thing to be here. Because like you said, maybe not him specifically, but his administration is the one that got people hyped up about this, and now they're coming out and going, yeah, there was really nothing here all along. All right, now we're going to look at some of the social media posts that he published in the last week that have a very interesting vibe, because usually he's conveying information in a very convinced way. And in this one, we're seeing some things that we haven't quite seen before, starting with this one, which made the rounds in the news and is really, really interesting. So I'll leave you guys a couple of seconds with it for those of you who haven't read it, so you can take a look at this thing that he posted earlier this week. And then we'll talk about a little bit what we're seeing here psychologically in this post.
So one of the things that I noticed was that he's basically creating in-groups and out-groups. And what we do with in-groups and out-groups is that when we have an in-group, those are our people. That's who we relate to. That's who keeps us safe. All of those kinds of things. And so when he talks about so-called friends, I think that was an expression he used, he's trying to point out that if you don't agree with him, that you're just like the people that we don't like. You're just like the Democrats. You're just like the people that are trying to harm my administration and those sorts of things. So as he continues to focus on that, he's basically saying, you're either with me or you're against me.
One thing that is really, really important here is that he made a massive, massive misstep when it comes to in-grouping psychology. So earlier you said the term in-group, and this is any group that we feel that we're a part of. This is our clique, our crew. And he did something that we know through research is a really big mistake. And I'm quickly gonna go through one of my favorite studies on this because I find it so interesting. And it was conducted at the Petrified Forest, which is a natural landmark in Arizona. And they noticed that a lot of the visitors were stealing little wood chips as a little souvenir. So they put up a sign that said, there's been a high theft rate recently, please don't steal. But it wasn't really working, so they brought in the experts to see what they were doing wrong. So the experts split the park into 3 sections. One section, no sign. That's called the control group. They want to see what the theft rate is if you don't say anything. And the theft rate was 2.9% approximately. That means about 3% of people were stealing wood chips. The second section had a sign that said, don't steal. That's it. No extra stuff, just don't steal. That went down. 1.6% of people were stealing. The sign was effective. They were paying attention. But what's really interesting is what happened in that third section, when they said there's been a high theft rate, do not steal. In that section, the theft rate went up, not just a little, but significantly to almost 8%. And the reason for that is because although they thought they were just putting some information out there, we've had a high theft rate, please don't do that. What it was doing, it was telling other visitors that my in-group, other people who have been here, are stealing. That's not a bad idea. Maybe I should do it myself as well. So without wanting to, they were cueing the people on how to behave. And Donald Trump did the exact same mistake in this post that we just looked at. Right in the beginning, he said, what's going on with my boys, and in some cases, gals, they're all going after Attorney General Pam Bondi. So in an attempt to try to be open about his frustrations, he is cueing his followers on what his other followers are doing, basically saying, everyone else like you, all the other people who follow me, he says, they're all going after Pam Bondi. And although he might think that that's a way for him to get them on his side, it actually might have the reverse effect. And they all go, well, wait a second, why are all the other supporters against Pam Bondi? Maybe I should be against her as well. So you think in terms of your in-group. So he thinks that he's got the authority here, but he's cueing them on what everyone else in their in-group is doing. And this is something we can all use in business, marketing, sales, in relationships. Basically, social proof is the idea that when you tell someone what everybody else is doing, it encourages that behavior. And sometimes it's positive. Like for example, on a book, when you say New York Times bestseller, that tells people, oh my God, a lot of people bought this, I should buy it as well. But if we don't want that behavior to take place, we should never advertise that other people are doing it. So Dr. G, when we saw this post, I actually texted you, I don't know if you remember, pretty much immediately and said, this is gonna have the reverse effect. He's gonna have even more people questioning him.
Yeah, you called that immediately. Absolutely.
And then a few days later, what did we see? More of his followers.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, unfortunately, and the funny thing about this stuff is that it's all unconscious. The unconscious mind is so powerful. So most people aren't going to be picking this apart like we are right now and realizing the effect that it has, but it absolutely has these effects. You called it immediately, and that's exactly how we're seeing it play out. So it is funny though when we reflect on how much of this is reflexive, how much we just take in the world around us and react in ways that we don't consciously think about. It just sort of is. So this is a great example of how that works.
100%. It's subconscious and it's related to our need to survive, because historically, if we acted the way the group acted, we would survive. And if we didn't, we'd be outcast, and that would compromise our survivability. There was another line in this post that you and I both, let's say, noticed. But to talk about it, we have to accessorize a little bit. So are you ready to accessorize? I love how it goes over the headphones.
I always wear my headphones. It's got to.
So this is not us doing our impressions of Hershey Kisses. This is us putting on the tinfoil hats. Now, the reason we need our tinfoil hats is because this is, I think, Dr. G, it's safe to say, a little bit uncharacteristic of us to kind of follow that conspiracy theory path a little bit. But there's a line in here that is hard to ignore. Do you want to talk about what line that is?
Absolutely. There's a very short line where President Trump says, all over a guy who never dies, Jeffrey Epstein. Now, that's a very interesting word choice. I've heard a lot of theories here. I'm just, you can't dispute that President Trump did say that.
He said that. And look, granted, I'm just going to do this for a second. He most likely means we're keeping him alive by talking about him. That's likely what he means. Like the guy died, we're still talking about him, so it seems like he never dies. But really interesting choice of words. Like I'm just saying, what an odd choice of words to talk about someone when he knows that there's a ton of theories out there that the guy didn't die, somebody got him out of there. We all know that theory's out there, and we can all look at it and go, that's a crazy theory. But then that's a really interesting word choice. That's all I'm saying. Interesting word choice. That's it. All right, finally, Dr. G, I'd love for you to talk about the follow-up post. So there was that first one, and we were speaking to each other, and I said, this is going to blow up. He's basically cueing his followers to look more into Pam Bondi and turn on her. And then later, a couple of days after that, on Wednesday, he had another post. I'll put it up on the screen, but can you walk us a little bit through what you're seeing here from a psychological standpoint?
So really what he's doing is he's more explicitly stating the in-groups and out-groups. He is saying, and unfortunately, this is some of the language he uses, that you're weak, you're stupid if you believe this, that you're doing the Democrats' work for them. He gets very pejorative with his word choice. He's really insulting, saying basically, you're my past follower if you believe this stuff. I don't want you to follow me anymore if this is what you believe. So it's truly creating like, if you are not with me, you truly are on the out group, and I don't like you anymore. So what that does, he's someone who bases so much of how he operates on relationships. And so, and I think I mentioned that before. And in essence, right here, he's saying, I'm not going to have any sort of relationship with you if you do not agree with this. And the fact that people continue to talk about it, and as we mentioned earlier, this is sort of an issue of his own creation. I think that's building up a unique type of anger that he doesn't typically express. And so what we're seeing now is we're seeing him get more and more frustrated because he's got things he wants people to focus on. Look at what he's doing, whether it's economically or other things that he says are in the win column. And people aren't talking about that. They're asking him about something he doesn't want to talk about. And to him, losing that kind of control is going to be immensely frustrating. He's used to being able to talk about whatever he wants, have people receive it well, and that's just not happening. So we're really seeing him tighten the reins and say, look, you're either part of this group or you're not. I was listening to the playwright David Mamet talking about President Trump, and he is someone who's a big advocate for President Trump. And he basically said on TV once, somebody said, hey, do you think that the election was stolen? He said, no, I don't. And President Trump personally called him and said, hey, why'd you wuss out? Why'd you do that? So for people that know him, you actually have to answer for what you say publicly. He is very big on the idea that if you are in my inner circle, if you're with me, you are with me. And if you're not, you absolutely are not. And that's what he's doing to his base right now.
Yeah, beautifully said. And it's confusing for his followers, right? Because they were like, Epstein is important. Yeah, let's look into that. And then all of a sudden, Epstein's not important. Oh, I thought Epstein was important. Oh, now I can't even think about Epstein because I can't be part of this group if I am. So yeah, it's exactly like you said. It's like this group doesn't care about Epstein. If you want to be in this group, it's like he's doubling down on that in group and those parameters of saying, no, you can't look into this topic if you're on my side. As opposed to just going, here's what it is or here's what it's not, openly, and that's it. You know, like there almost seems to be this tightening this in group out of a sense of fear of a topic. So I guess that with this, we could go to our conclusion. Dr. G, you know, you've covered this case at great length with some more information coming in this week. What is your conclusion behaviorally, psychologically as to what's going on here? Is there really nothing to see here and we're just seeing these odd behaviors because they don't know how to handle that? Is there something more? What's your overall thought on this?
Well, my personal thought just logically is that there's more to see here. I think I have that same feeling that many people do, which is like there's things that don't necessarily pass the smell test, that there's just nothing to see. But in terms of the behaviors that we're seeing, I think it's a combination of the fact that maybe they feel like they fumbled it. There are a million ways they could have presented this information and said some similar conclusions, but said it in a different way, which would have been received so much better. Even just saying there's reasons that we can't release a client list or something. I mean, there's so many different ways they could have framed it and still had the same end result of not releasing anything. So the fact that they did it this way, I'm sure there is some frustration that they chose to approach it this way, whether that's frustration with himself, with Pam Bondi, with somebody. I'm sure that there's frustration. And I think that that's showing because there's no control here. President Trump is someone who's always had a voice that people listen to. And right now, I think he's lost that in a way that probably is tremendously frustrating for him. And so I think we're seeing that play out. And like I said, this is a unique situation. So in essence, I'm not sure that he knows the best way to do this right now because he's never dealt with this with the people who voted for him.
Dr. G, thank you so much for being here with us today. I think the insight you bring to this case, to this story, is wonderful. If you guys want to follow Dr. G on YouTube, which you absolutely should, the link to his channel is down in the description. Let us know in the comments if you'd like to see some more collaborations. I'd love to have you back on the channel. Thank you so much for this, dude. It was amazing.
I'm so happy I got a chance to do it. Thanks.
So there it was, and I think we've said everything that there is to say about this story. And for me, at the end of the day, the thing that stands out the most is that inconsistency. The way one part of the story doesn't match up with this part of the story, doesn't match up with what they said last week and what they're saying now. Even within the same statement, there's contradictions. When he's saying, I would like to see that, and then seconds later, he's saying that it was made up by Comey and Obama, and then seconds after that, saying whatever credible information she does have, she should release. Well, if it's all made up, then there should be no credible information. So yeah, to me, these inconsistencies usually indicate that there's a giant red flag here. Because when you tell the truth, every time you tell it, it all works together. It all meshes together. And there are these little things that go, wait a second, you said this, but now you're saying that. And now, wait, what? She's saying that, but he's saying that. All these inconsistencies, too much conflict here. But I suppose it's possible that the reason we're seeing all this nervousness and tension and stress is because they're aware that they overpromised and underdelivered, and that in itself is throwing them off. It is possible that's what it is, but again, like Dr. G said, there would have been a way to handle that, to say, listen, we know it's surprising, but we did an extensive investigation, we didn't find anything, we understand your frustration, level with this audience a little bit who was expecting something and got nothing. But let me know in the comments what you think. Do you believe that all these inconsistencies point to there's just got to be something more to this story? Or is it simply the stress of them knowing that the American public will not be happy with them saying that they found nothing? Let me know in the comments. Let me know what you thought of the video, and I'll see you on the next one.